Welcome to update number 18 on the Lackawanna cutoff. Scranton Service, Amtrak makes it to the FRA list. Hi, I'm Chuck Walsh, and we're here at the Delaware River Viaduct behind me, and we're going to talk about what's been going on this week. Some very big news, important news from the Federal Railroad Administration, the FRA, which is in charge of what they call the Corridor ID program. That particular program is going to possibly, we hope, fund the Lackawanna cutoff and New York to Scranton service at some point. Now we're going to talk about what that process is here and where we are at this point. I'm going to talk about 5 steps, one of which was just completed, as a matter of fact, from the FRA. We'll call it step 0. Step 0 was the application of all the different corridors that were vying or are vying to get funding from the FRA to build their projects. The announcement this past week included 62 corridors that will move on to what we call step 1 of the FRA process. Step 0, as I'm calling it, which doesn't exist for the FRA purposes, was basically the application process. That's over with. Now we have 62 corridors which are vying for additional funding to go through the process, and from their perspective, hopefully we'll get the big funding which will allow them to do their project. Now, the step 1 is basically the very beginning of the process, even though the application is the very beginning, but the beginning of where really the work starts to get done that's going to result in projects getting done. Step 1 allows all the different applicants to receive up to $500,000 in funding without a match. In other words, it's a grant, which will go, in this case, we're talking about Scranton Service now specifically, to the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, or PennDOT. They're the lead applicant, and with co-applicants of New Jersey Transit and the Pennsylvania Northeast Regional Railroad Authority, or PNRRA. That's Larry Malsky's organization. So step 1 is, yes, it's the beginning, but in terms of Scranton Service, Scranton application, Scranton, New York application, there's reason to believe that that particular application is further along than probably many of the other applications. Now, the reason why is, and we've talked about this in previous videos, Amtrak did a study for the Pennsylvania Northeast Regional Railroad Authority back in 2022 and was submitted to the FRA with this, I'll call it step 0 application, back in March of 2023. That study included lots of different details that will be needed further down in the process. For example, Amtrak defined or was able to create an actual schedule for the 6 trains daily, 3 will be eastbound and 3 westbound, for using New Jersey Transit trackage, and also, of course, Lackawanna cutoff and the trackage here in Pennsylvania. The Scranton line, so to speak, would start at New York Penn Station with a stop at Newark Broad Street, and depending on which way the trains are going, either go to Montclair via the Montclair-Boonton line, or to Morristown via the Morristown line, and then go further west. The next stop will be Dover for all trains, Blairstown. On the Pennsylvania side, it would be East Stroudsburg, Mount Pocono, and then finally Scranton. Now, what's important to realize with the Scranton application is that the entire right-of-way, 136 miles, is all publicly owned. In fact, FRA calls this out, that talk about the 62 applications and that they were approved to go to step one. Well, each one had a little blurb associated with it, and the blurb that the Scranton corridor had included an interesting mention of the whole right-of-way being publicly owned. So we've emphasized that. We know it's important, but obviously the FRA understands that as well. So now that we talk about step one, all these different applications, there were 95 to start out with, it went down to 62. There's high-speed rail, there's conventional rail, there's extension of existing rail service. So there's a combination of different types of services that would be either augmented or started from, and essentially from scratch. That would be the case here. Now, in talking about these different steps, step one is really getting ready to scope for what will be, and we're going to talk a lot about this, a service development plan. And that's the document that has to be created, and that will be the justification for going for the big money down the line. Now, first of all, I want to talk about step two, and that's the creation of a service development plan. Now, step one, which everybody's in right now, is basically meant to, in order to determine how much money you need to do the service development plan. Now, the service development plan, there isn't any kind of funding necessarily associated with it yet. It's what they call 90-10. So if, let's say, you need $1 million, you'll have to come up with $100,000, and the feds will give you $900,000, and that'll give you $1 million. In step two, we're expecting that Scranton is going to, which is the service development plan, that they're going to be doing a study probably with New Jersey Transit on the Lackawanna cutoff. At least New Jersey Transit is talking about that. We'll see if how that's going to work out. And that would be put together with the existing information from Amtrak, which was done on the Pennsylvania side, the 60 miles from Slateford down here up to Scranton itself. And that would presumably become part of that service development plan I'm talking about in step two. Now, what about step three? Now, step three is where the final engineering would be done, which is usually about 10% of the total cost and all that. And that'll all be determined by the service development plan in step two. Well, step three, though, what's interesting about step three is that if you look at the information that was published by the FRA, it would have been last year, about the whole corridor ID program. There is a mention in there that they say that step three, if I'll read through the lines basically, that it's basically going to only be for those projects which they think are actually going to go to what I'll call step four, which is the big funding. In other words, basically building the project. I call it step four. There isn't any step four in FRA's parlance, but that's what they call the moving on to the project work. So that basically you get into the project pipeline, and that's where you're getting the big bucks. But anything in step three, whether it's my step four or just step three as FRA defines it, is what they call 80-20. So it's 80% federal funding, and then 20% has to come from a match, like from the states. So that's the difference there. Still, that's really good money, because much of federal funding now for transportation is 50-50. So in this particular case, the federal government is chipping in quite a bit. But that's going to be down the road. Now, because the final question is, well, when is all this going to take place? When are trains going to be running? Well, assuming that Scranton Service is able to make it to the finish line and makes it to what I call step four, the project pipeline, we're probably talking and this is all conjecture, so don't go around saying, well, Chuck Wall says this or that. But basically, from what I'm hearing, we're talking maybe a year or two with study work. I know people dread the thought of study work, but in a sense, this is going to be the final study, really, study work. But basically, before we can actually get to construction, which we're being told would take 3 years once construction starts. So, depending how quickly this process works, which, as I've mentioned, we think that Scranton has actually done quite a bit of the necessary work that would already be included in the service development plan, including what they call a FONSI, the finding of no significant impact in their environmental study back in 2009. Maybe that has to be freshened up, but that, I would hazard a guess that probably most of those 62 corridors don't have that done at all. So once again, another leg up, but still, you know, we're talking 1 to 2 years plus another 3 years. I mean, could there be another year thrown there? I don't know, but what we're talking about is probably 5 years from the time we're making this video. So, but don't hold me to this. That's the end of 2028, maybe 2029. We'll see. Of course, New Jersey Transit work at Roosevelt Tunnel and Andover continues. That project is scheduled to launch in 2027. So any kind of Amtrak project is not going to beat that, presumably. Realistically, it's going to be at least a year or maybe 2, we don't know. 3, I don't know. I mean, I think at this point, this is a brand new process, so the problem is government usually works best when there's a process that works and it's done over and over again. At this point, we don't have a process that has been done before. Everything is new. This has never been done, this 3-step process that FRA, that I call 5 steps, but basically 3 steps that they define. This is all new. So in any case, that's kind of basically where we are at this point. And we'll keep you up to date. Don't know if there's going to be more information coming immediately or as we're going through the holidays here. It may be quiet, I don't know. So I'd like to do these updates when there's significant new information. Obviously this is significant, but not necessarily to go and say, well, we don't have any more information. That try to basically make each update something significant to add. So that's where we are right now. And we'll try to keep you up to date, but for now, thank you for watching and hope you look forward to update number 19 on the Lackawanna Cutoff.